What makes the achievement of emotional sobriety so difficult is the habits we have, the patterns we have in our behavior, the habitual ways that we've come to think about things. We have to really become aware of those things in order to challenge them, because the consciousness that has created a lot of the problems in our life cannot solve it, cannot change things. So what happens is the first step is waking up. Well, tonight we are continuing our exploration of the 12 steps. And this time we're looking at it from the point of view as how the steps help promote and develop an authentic self-esteem, and how that self-esteem is so critical and necessary for our emotional sobriety. As you know, if you've been to this meeting before, that there are 4 discussants, and we take different turns at leading the discussion that night. Roger was unable to make it last week, but he's feeling good enough to be here tonight, which I'm so glad for. And Roger, without any further ado, I'll let you pick up this discussion on step 8, such an important step in our recovery.
Thank you, Al, for the opportunity to speak tonight. Hello to each of you, people tuning into this meeting, and thank you very much for doing so. So, does step 8 raise self-esteem? And if so, how? Step 8 says, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. As Herb and Alan have said, in steps 8 and 9, we move from an emphasis on self to focusing on relationships. In his opening statements in the 12 steps and 12 traditions regarding step 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs, Bill W. wrote, all of AA's 12 steps ask us to go counter to our natural desires. They all deflate our egos. When it comes to ego deflation, few steps are harder to take than 5. Makes sense, right? Admitting the exact nature of our wrongs is painful. Admitting the exact nature of our wrongs is humbling. So that's true. But from my perspective, step 8, in combination with step 9, is particularly powerful as well, to end the domination of our ego, to bring us the awareness we need to pop the bubble of our inflated sense of self-importance, or pseudo self-esteem, or false self, as we also call it. From early on in these emotional sobriety workshops, since we began focusing on self-esteem, we've emphasized that we're talking about self-esteem based in humility, which means a sense of self-worth, self-confidence, and self-respect that's grounded in the reality of our imperfection. Our imperfection as human beings. Thus, a variation on the affirmation I've offered in past meetings, in spite of my many imperfections, I am worthy of love and worthy of happiness. I am a worthwhile human being. In other words, I don't have to be perfect to deserve to be here. I don't have to be perfect to value my existence, to value myself as a person. However strong my own beliefs may be to the contrary at times. I've also said that I would add the pillar of taking responsibility for the reality of our impact on others as a pillar of our self-esteem. As most of you know, we're using psychotherapist and psychologist Nathaniel Branden's book, The 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem, as our main reference when we talk about self-esteem. So in addition to the importance of humility, I feel very strongly about placing more emphasis on how our relationship functioning impacts our self-esteem and the impacts of those we interact with. So you can see that I'm particularly pleased to see us turning toward, in steps 8 and 9, a relationship focus. How could there not be a lot of focus on self when we're talking about self-esteem, right? It's totally warranted, totally appropriate, but it's just not the whole picture. Without the process of differentiation, of forming our own sense of identity, of becoming more and more who we are, we can easily be lost in the world. It's all very necessary. And in addition to that, we need to attend to our relationships and how they either positively or negatively impact how we feel about ourselves. Let me talk about harm for a couple of minutes. In the 12 and 12, on step 8, Bill Wilson writes, we might next ask ourselves what we mean when we say we have, quote, harmed other people. And Herb, I've got to say, I did listen and watch the video of last week. Your explanation of steps 8 and 9 was fantastic, man. The specificity and detail and the questions and the comments about forgiveness of self, forgiveness of others. I was so impressed, as I always am, by the depth of your wisdom and what you offer. To go back to Bill Wilson, what kinds of harm do we mean? Do people do to one another anyway? To define the word, quote, harm in a practical way, we might call it the result of instincts in collision, which cause physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual damage to people. That's the point I wanted to emphasize. We need to think of it at all of those levels, within ourselves, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and interpersonally. If our tempers are consistently bad, we arouse anger in others. If we lie or cheat, we deprive others not only of their worldly goods, but of their emotional security and peace of mind. We really issue them an invitation to become contemptuous and vengeful. If our sexual conduct is selfish, we may excite jealousy, misery, and a strong desire to retaliate in kind. Such gross misbehavior is not by any means a full catalog of the harms that we do. And then he goes on to describe perhaps more subtle forms of harm. A pattern of withdrawal or callousness or insensitivity in our families, and so on, and so on. This is why it's so important, from my point of view, to begin to become aware, which is greatly emphasized in self-esteem and its development, as well as emotional sobriety, as well as in the 12 steps, to become aware of what our own patterns are, of the specific ways, as Herb talked about last week, that I have harmed others. In steps 8 and 9, I'm told to become aware of those ways and the specific others that I have harmed. I need to own that I have done this harm in order to move forward, if I am to become free. That is what step 8 and 9 require of me. To the extent my level of self-esteem is a function of my alignment with and acceptance of reality. How I treat others, how I disconnect with them or connect with them, how I cause harm to them or have enriched their lives, contribute to their happiness or contribute to their pain, has a huge impact on my level of self-esteem in my life. And I suspect it does in yours as well. So it's important not to get black and white. When we're talking about excessive emotional dependency, when we're talking about excessive self-focus, it's important to realize all of these things are on a spectrum. And if I get into black and white thinking about them, I can get into believing that there's no middle ground, that every form of dependency is a bad thing, that every form of self-concern is a bad thing. And that's a mistake, because our ability to show flexibility in our lives, our ability to function across the full spectrum of choices that we have, is very much tied to our level of self-esteem and to how we conduct ourselves in our relationships. Brandon's self-esteem writings are very individualistically inclined, as I said. But even so, in his book, The 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem, he has quite a bit to say about relationships and functioning. I'll give some examples, tying in the difficult work, the very humbling work of taking ownership of the ways we have harmed others and how that connects to self-esteem. And to once again make the point, whether we're talking about emotional sobriety as the explicit topic, or the 12 steps as the explicit topic, or self-esteem as our subject matter, there is a tremendous amount of commonality, common ground among all 3 of those terms. In talking about self-responsibility, one of the 6 pillars of self-esteem, Brandon writes, in taking responsibility for our own existence, we implicitly recognize that other human beings are not our servants and do not exist for the satisfactions of our needs. We are not morally entitled to treat other human beings as means to our ends. I do it. I've done it. I suspect we've all done it, especially when my ends feel really urgent and really pressing to me, right? Or what I want feels really urgent or really pressing to me. If we think of a spectrum, relationally speaking, of high self-focus, and then across the spectrum to very high other focus. If I'm locked into, in a rigid way, especially if it's very characteristic of me in my life, not just in a few situations, to that extremely high self-focus, I'm not going to have much awareness of the other, right? I'm not going to have much curiosity about them, except how they might be able to meet my needs. I'm not going to be tuned into them emotionally or have much empathy. I'm not going to be very concerned about the consequences of my actions to them, right? That's the extreme self-focus. On the other hand, we've talked about extreme other focus, trying to take care of other people all the time, controlling them as well, often. Codependency is the term we often use for that, right? or trying to placate them in order to win approval, another aspect of emotional dependency. If I'm in that position, guess what? I'm probably not going to be very connected to my own needs, to my own experience, to my own hopes and dreams and desires and emotions. Or I might be in touch with them, but I'm dismissive of them. I ignore them. I abandon them. If I'm going to move from the third position in that spectrum, an integrated or position of balance that we'll call we, I need to have a flow of energy, a flexibility between my perspective, my point of view, my internal experience, and a desire to connect with your reality, your experience. It's fine for me to be connected with what I want. It's fine for me to be able to express and assert what I want. It's better if after doing so and expressing that, I inquire about what you want. And I treat it as seriously and the protection of your integrity, your wholeness, as I treat my own. Hard to do. We all develop patterns growing up where we tend to try to cope with life as best we can by lodging ourselves in one end of that spectrum or the other. But, well, I'll use an example here. I'm connected with what I want to say to you guys tonight, and I have strong feelings about a lot of it. But if I'm not also simultaneously aware of you, aware of trying to express what I want to say in ways that I'm hopeful you can connect with, and most importantly, that feel like they have some meaning or some relevance to you and have some value to you, then I'm in we territory, okay, to put it simply. I'm not just in me territory. I'm not just in you territory. I'm in we territory. And most of the time, especially as I've gotten older, there is so often a way, if we're conscious of where we tend to reside, what our pattern tends to be, right? And have enough awareness of it, and are courageous enough to begin to experiment some with other places on that spectrum, there is a way to include I, you, and to grow the experience of a we, of a connection. In terms of self-esteem, from my experience, it's the ability to experience all three of those areas of focus, attention, energy, action that are very important. So let me continue with what I was saying. Never ask a person to act against his or her self-interest as he or she understands it. Wow, how often do I do that? How often has the harm that I have done to other people involved me trying to ask them or manipulate them or get them to do what I need and want them to do without being concerned whether they wanted to do that or not? Guilty as charged, right? Still in my life at times, guilty as charged. If we wish people to take some action or provide some value, we are obliged to offer some reasons that are meaningful and persuasive in terms of their goals and interests. This attitude is the foundation of mutual goodwill respect, and benevolence among human beings, among us. Something else, in writing about self-esteem in action, behavior that we need to engage in to build self-esteem. This is directly relevant to steps 8 and 9. Quote, willingness to admit and correct mistakes. A basic characteristic of self-esteem is a strong reality orientation. Facts are a higher priority than beliefs are. Truth is a higher priority than being right. Consciousness, attention, living more consciously, pillar number 1 of the 6 pillars, is perceived as a higher value than self-protective unconsciousness. Boy, that's the part of me that doesn't want to cop to causing you any harm, right? I don't want to go there. I don't want to feel the embarrassment, the shame, the guilt, the pain, the regret, remorse. Add your own word, right? I don't want to go anywhere near any of that. That's why this is about contrary action, okay? If self-trust is tied to respect for reality, then correcting an error is esteemed above pretending not to have made one. Healthy self-esteem is not afraid to say, when the occasion warrants it, I was wrong. Denial and defensiveness are characteristics of insecurity, guilt, feelings of inadequacy, and shame. It is low self-esteem that experiences the simple admission of error as humiliation or even self-damnation. I want to go to a couple specific examples related to specific pillars. Living consciously, as I just mentioned, is the first pillar. He gives many examples of what it means to live more consciously. A couple of those that are directly relevant to steps 8 and 9. In steps 8 and 9, we notice and confront it is true. In steps 8 and 9, as well as in our efforts to live more consciously, we notice and confront our impulses to deny or avoid painful or threatening realities. Fear and pain should be treated as signals not to close our eyes and pull inward and back, but to open our eyes and look forward, seeking ways to expand awareness, he says, a commitment to learning, and therefore a commitment to growth as a way of life, is what expanding our consciousness, living more consciously, asks of us. And if we're not doing that in steps 8 and 9, I don't know where we're doing that. Expanding our awareness. With regard to the pillar of self-responsibility, I am responsible for the level of consciousness I bring to my relationships. I am responsible for being aware of the impact of my actions on those around me. My spouse, my kids, my friends, my coworkers. I am responsible for attending to, being aware of the impact of my words and my behavior. So all of this talk about, don't make me responsible for your feelings. If you hadn't done that, I wouldn't have done this. All of this talk about blaming others, even blaming ourselves, as we've talked about, is unhelpful. But owning what I've done, what I'm becoming aware of in terms of harm to you at any of those levels, emotionally, materially, physically, spiritually, that is my job. And I get to talk about how hard that is, and I get to talk about how difficult that is for me. I get to talk about how afraid I am to do that. I get to talk about all of that. Why? Because it's part of reality. But I still need to find ways to make progress with doing it, with taking action. I hold up a mirror to myself rather than look at what other people are doing. As usual, I have a lot more I'd like to say, but I'd love to hear what others have to say as well. So thank you so much for your attention. Thank you.
Damn. That's a 2-syllable damn, by the way.
That's a
Texas
that's a
2-syllable
Texas
damn.
damn.
Wow, Roger.
Well, you want to kick us off, Thom, and then Herb, and then I'll go.
Sure. And Alan knows this more than anybody because he and I've been presenting for many years through the years together, that I have the hardest time in the world working from notes. But the problem with this thing that the four of us are doing is whenever one of you is talking, I'm taking just volumes of notes. It's like, and it's like I want to remember everything to say. So what I'm going to try to do today, this is my experiment today. I'm going to try to, I say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I got 6 bullet points that I just came up with, that I just started writing things that I would want to take off on what you're saying. And it's like, and I really do have the same experience with each of you, is that you give me new things to think about, but you also give me new words to think about, new words and ways of new language, I should say, for thinking about what we're already thinking about. And it's like, so that's very validating. Okay. So I'm going to do my bullet points and just try not to be too comprehensive here. It's, first of all, I also just want to say, where you hit me right in the heart and gut was where you talked about asking people to violate their own self-interest. It's like, and I get what you're saying, and this sounds like an excuse for me in the present time. You guys let me know, but I don't mean it that way. But as we go through these 12 steps with this self-esteem stuff, I'm finding myself reflecting back all the way back to the darker times. It's like, I get what you're saying, and I can give examples of how I can still do that today, or how I did that yesterday, or how I might do it tomorrow, stuff like that. But man, it brings me close to tears in my eyes when I think about how I just was horrible. I was a horrible person, and how I did that with anybody that was in my path, and it's like I was, I thought myself a good guy. I was delusional as hell. I thought I was wearing the white hat the whole time, but I was constantly either asking people to violate their self-interest, or at least not the slightest bit interested in the fact that they were. That was not a concern of mine. So thank you for reminding me of where I have come from and why these steps are so important. Okay, bullet point number 1: we pop the bubble of self-importance so that we can move towards genuine self-esteem. I love that. That's genuine self-esteem is not self-importance. It's that part where it's like, I'm neither humility is, I am neither worse nor better. We are the same. It's like, I love that. Second one. I love the part where you say, in spite of my imperfections, I still deserve. It's like, this is one of the things I've talked about frequently in this group through the years, is my first sponsor taught me that, because I had such a hard time with deservingness, the whole idea of deservingness, and he fixed it for me by saying, it's not like you won an award and you deserve something for it. It's not like you've done something wonderful and you deserve. He said all that means is you deserve something just as much as the next guy. What it means is you're not undeserving. And that made so much difference to me once deservingness became a part of humility. And you reminded me of that tonight. Third bullet point, this character, what you're talking about, Roger, characterizes the self-awareness and the self-acceptance that I think that has come through doing what Alan does about how the steps build on each other, but specifically with 6 and 7, becoming ready and then asking these things to be removed, brings us to a place of self-acceptance that is, at least this time through, is different, much improved than any other acceptance of myself or I've ever had before. And I think specifically about what I used to think of as acceptance of the dark parts of myself was when I was in shame, which is a self-absorbed state. It's like, that's not what this is. That's not what self-acceptance is, not what Brandon's talking about with self-esteem, not what Roger, you're talking about with that. But the idea that acceptance of this is not being in shame. It's simply based on what you said. It's the facts. This is the truth about me. This has been the truth about me. The truth about me is I am working on changing that, improving that. And with steps 8 and 9, moving toward interaction with people that where I might do a little bit more healing for myself, which is the first thing we think about in terms of 12 step, but also maybe emphasizing some help for others as well. Okay, 2 more. Genuine self-esteem now comes from my willingness to be rigorously honest. It's not about a value judgment. It's not about if I'm good or bad. It's like, because I don't, not only do I not mind making mistakes, I kind of like making mistakes sometimes because I get to do that. I get to say, okay, well, I was wrong. And it's like, that no longer feels like an insult to me. It feels like, I think it's a strength. And Alan, you and I, we both love to teach by demonstrating. I mean, we would just as soon, I think you and I are the same. We would just as soon just start with question and answer and do demonstrations all day long. And it's like, people have asked me through the years when I say I love people to come up and role play things, just kind of improv the whole thing. They say, well, what happens when you get stumped? And I go like, I love it when I get stumped. Because I just absolutely love it, because either I'm going to find my way through it, or I get, as a trainer, I get to look at these people and realistically say, I would be stumped at this particular place in this session. And so I would basically be killing time to get the hell out of the session until I could call my friend Alan and talk to him about what else I might do. And that's just realistic. And I've been in enough training to know that when a trainer can acknowledge that they don't always have the damn answers, it's like, I feel so validated, because I don't always have them. But the other thing I've also loved about this is a little bit of an aside, but it's like so often in my trainings, of more recent trainings, is like when I get stumped in some kind of a role play like that, very often there's somebody in the group, in the training group, who can get me out of it, and I will just turn to the group and say, anybody else got something better than me? And they come in there and they just kill it, and it's like, I've learned something, everybody's learned something. And I mean, this is just completely different than it would have been for me in my younger years. I feel perfectly wonderful about myself at that point. Not like, oh, aren't I great because I'm doing, it's not arrogant. It's just like, no, I just feel like I'm more like everybody than different. And then the last bullet point, maybe repeating this, but this all moves me to a place where I'm not basing my self-esteem on a value judgment of mine beyond just whether or not I'm being honest. That I called it in my notes, I called it simplified self-esteem. Am I telling the truth? Am I telling the truth? Am I telling myself the truth, and am I admitting the truth to you? So anyway, that's what you inspired in me today, Roger. Thank you.
Thank you, Thom.
And I'm glad you're feeling better.
Thank you for that as well. Yeah.
Thanks, Thom. And thanks, Roger, very much. Always, as Thom mentioned, filling up a couple pads with notes. And it's, I agree with some of the comment you made in the beginning, certainly about steps 8 and 9 as the hardest steps, because it's, for me, the first time I'm going outside of a very safe environment, either working alone by myself in the step or working with a very trusted, chosen step guide or sponsor to do the steps. And 8 and 9, I'm going out to people who are not necessarily in a 12-step program and may not even be on a spiritual path. So I'm just facing raw reality when I'm owning and acknowledging my perception of the negative impact of me in their lives. And very much like Thom, I was horrified. The moment the curtain parted, truly, it was part of the 4th step. But then, of course, as we got into the 8th step, where we got very specific with regard to the impact on other people, it's kind of like it hadn't been part of my radar system.
Yeah.
Other people, it wasn't like a denial, and I said, no, fuck them. I never, no, it wasn't in my consciousness. It was like they weren't relevant.
That's it, man. That is so. I mean,
That's a great word, Herb.
Oh my!
I mean,
It was so.
it.
Oh, it's kind of like, oh my.
Mm.
But anyway, the self-esteem material in the 6 pillars has been so opening up, and new vocabulary, new insights, new connections to the work that's been done up till now. And especially as you emphasized it, Roger, the first pillar being consciousness. It's probably because we're doing all of this that I'm really conscious of the word consciousness. And it seems like to be the most dominant and important cohesive connection for everything that I've ever learned or experienced, and that in terms of human and personal development. And then, of course, as he says in his 6 pillars, at the very end, not even one of the 6 pillars, willingness. He says, like, this is kind of like, this is the key to some aspect of it. I forget, he said maybe even a 7th pillar, but I forget, I read it at some point.
He does say it's a 7th pillar. Yeah.
Oh, okay, all right, yeah, I thought I remembered that. And the key to step 8 is certainly the awareness of the impact, but the willingness to address it, not only just to change me so that I'm not repeating it, but to repair that damage. That willingness is really the key. And I somebody once said something about enlightened self-interest, because it's being so difficult, as both of you have talked about. What's the motive? I mean, why would I do this? Well, it's actually in my best interest, as we've talked about in the forgiveness process. To release them, I'm released. It's paradoxical, but it's everywhere that anybody who has experience, spiritual or psychological, they talk about that paradoxical experience. When I release them, I'm released. And we're talking about it, and Roger, you mentioned it, the bullseye motivator is freedom, my personal self-development, my personal happiness is actually literally underneath it all anyway. There was one, it was kind of like going back to, I was reminded recently about the golden rule. And that is, I want to be treated in a certain way. And this is the paradox. When I treat other people as I want to be treated, it seems normally to work out that I'm going to be treated the way I want to be treated. Right. So it's in my best interest to treat. Now, I knew that, but I never operated that way until it actually became experiential, where it was not just here anymore. It was literally here from lived experience. After I made the steps 8 and 9 and had the experience, it was kind of like, oh, this is what it feels like. I knew
that, but I didn't know that, right?
I could describe it. I could define it. I could mesmerize you with my but I didn't know it in the sense of an experience, and Alan talks about the gestalt of it. It all came together. So powerful stuff. Bill talks and you reminded me right at the beginning, this one word about partnership. And again, it might be my selective attention, but I'm looking at my partnership with a power other than myself, my partnership with the people around me. Really thinking in terms of partnership gives me a sense of personal responsibility for myself to behave, but also to have healthy relationships with other people.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, what a great discussion so far. We could go on all night tonight with this, couldn't we? I mean, it's
We say that every time.
yeah. Well, in this one, we're going to be doing that because we're going to be extending step 8 beyond 4, and we'll talk about how to do that and stuff later on. But you know, you raised a very important question, like you did back in step 4 and 5, about in what ways do we raise our self-esteem when we're facing all of these parts of us that we haven't wanted to face, that we haven't wanted to see, that do not fit with the image of who we're supposed to be and how we should act. And, you know, there's so many expectations around being a good person. And if you're not a good person, then what are you, right? That kind of a thing. The world gets so divided into good and bad. And it's very hard not to talk about this stuff with that language, first of all. That's a big problem, by the way. It's not the solution. We are not bad people trying to become good people. And we got to emphasize this. It's taking things in the wrong direction when we start to think that that's what this discussion is about. It's not that at all. So in what ways do we raise our self-esteem? Well, I wrote down here, by facing the worst in us, we are becoming the best in us. By facing the worst in us, we are becoming the best in us. You see, in every person, there are 2 instincts. 1, to honor self. 2 is to honor connection and to be part of a we, to belong. Every one of us feels that. Every person wants those 2 things. Problem is, in our culture, in our families, nobody ever taught us how to balance that out. Somebody made a comment in the chat, you know, because we're talking about one side of the spectrum a lot here when we talk about moving against people, right? Is taking, quote, the I position and not the we position. Well, a lot of people in our culture, it's often been assigned to the female gender role, but it's not limited to that. I see many men take this, and that their whole position is to erase themselves in order to please the other person. They sacrifice themselves under the idea that if somebody loves me, I'll be okay. And so they don't assert their needs at all in a relationship. They don't demand in the way directly, the way we're talking about, aggressively try to control the relationship. It's much more subtle than that, right? But there's still a very similar dynamic taking place. They are out of balance. See, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about, and Bill said this very clearly when he was describing what is emotional sobriety: real maturity and balance. His 2 phrases to describe it: real maturity and balance in our life, which is to say humility. And they said in relationship to ourselves, relationship to others, relationship to God. You know, I always add in relationship to life itself, right? Humility in relationship to life itself. So let's understand that what we are looking at is the ways that we're out of balance, whether we're out of balance in the I side or the we side. And you can do a lot of damage being out of balance on the we side. And we got to understand that when you sacrifice and you don't confront someone and you don't challenge them because you're afraid they're not going to like you, that's an amends worth making.
Mhm.
I am sorry I have failed you as a partner and that I protected myself. And what I thought that I needed was your love for me. So I wouldn't tell you how upset I was about what you were doing. I wouldn't confront you about what I felt was inappropriate behavior. That's an amends worth making. Nobody talks about that. And see, we've got to understand that when we're having this discussion, we are really talking about an imbalance here. And it is the imbalance which creates the harm. And it's not because we're bad people needing to become good people. It's we're people that are out of balance. That's it. You're out of balance. Not bad, not good. You're doing what you learned to do. You're doing, like Roger talked about before, that self-protective eye, losing the we and stuff. No one knows how to stay connected and to be able to cooperate that way. You know, I've been facing that in my life. I know Roger's faced it. I know Thom has, and I know Herb has. We all have faced this. So I want to kind of to put that in the context, right, of what we're talking about here. Let's not lose sight of this. We're not bad people needing to become good people. We are people out of balance and extremely ignorant, needing to become enlightened and get in balance. That's the issue for us here.
Well said. Very well said.
Yeah, I wasn't personally developed sufficiently to be a healthy partner.
Bill said it, true partnership. We have no concept of what that means.
Yeah.
And look, and at the same time, every one of us wants it. We desperately want to find that connection to the others. We definitely want that companionship that we have in our life.
Union with the preservation of connection with the preservation
of integrity is what we're striving for here, and we can fall out of one side of that bed or the other.
Exactly.
And one side, falling out of one side of bed hurts no less than falling out of the other. You're still falling out of the damn bed. Stay in the middle of the bed.
Hey, Alan, can I interrupt or interject real quick? When you talk about that imbalance, you know, it reminds me of that phrase, would you rather be right or happy, right? And that seems like that erases part of myself when I'm not speaking up, right? And that,
well, see, that phrase can be used to shut somebody off, right?
yeah.
I mean, it's so, you know, look, we could get into this whole thing about what we call silence-inducing strategies in relationships. And look, if I'm real good all the time, it makes it pretty hard for you to confront me about what you're not getting from me. I mean, think about that for a minute. Now, we act like that's such a, you know, wonderful thing, but I've seen many people choke off other people by being so nice and so wonderful and totally disarming. And how can I get upset with you? See, all of these things, we do these things because we don't know how to enjoy an authentic relationship. We don't know the value of it. We're afraid because it might mean that the image we have of ourselves is not true. And that's a hard thing. It's a hard thing to confront and to see.
I've got an example of where, you know, I'll in my head pretend to be a very magnanimous, and I'll let them get away with that, right? Without I'm not going to raise any fuss, and then there's this whole like, well, I must be more spiritual than them, you know, like
Right.
I hear a lot of people criticize the 12 steps that they're old-fashioned. I can understand that criticism. They were written back in 1935. Some people that are agnostic have difficulty with the word God used in the steps. For me, I look at the process that's involved, the forces that the 12 steps generate are so powerful that I think they're ageless. There's this interesting phenomena that happens when you work the steps. They create a charge and then a discharge. You know, the first step, we're powerless. Our life has become unmanageable. It creates this charge. You know, we're in big trouble and we don't know what to do. And then step 2 comes along and it says we have hope. That charge, that existential crisis that we have is resolved. What's happening here is parallel to life. We charge ourselves when we breathe in. When we exhale, we discharge. That's the rhythm of life. And the way I love to think about the 12 steps, it's helping us get connected to the rhythm of life so we can learn how to show up in a good way.